A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is the meeting of the Finance and Corporate Services Select Committee, and my name is Councillor John Riley and I'm the chairman of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intended to speak, please note that you will be filmed and that any statement you make will be recorded and made public. For those in the public gallery, not that we've got many, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors and officers who are speaking today that you should turn your microphone on using the on button when speaking, and this will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. What I'll do is ask people to introduce themselves, so go around the table and we'll start with Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Mark Braddock from Democratic Services.
Councillor Stuart Mathers, Labour Lead.
Councillor Robinson Sarpuri.
Councillor Narinda Gog.
I'm James Wright, Council's Health and Safety Manager.
Marion Finney, the Council's Customer Engagement Manager.
James Lake, Director of Pensions, Treasury and Statutory Accounts.
Councillor Kaushik Banerjee.
Councillor Kishan Bhatt. Councillor Wayne Bridges.
All right, thank you very much. Before we get started with the main agenda, some quick housekeeping matters. Fire alarm, we're not expecting a fire drill. So if the fire alarm goes off, please follow the officers to the fire exits, out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is in the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices, unless you're using them to follow the meeting, please make sure they're all switched off or put on silent anyway. All right, so to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
All members are present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, other than the usual ones that we will record anyway. Thank you. To approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of September 2023. They are, certainly as far as I'm concerned, having read them, an accurate reflection, nice and detailed, of all the things that we did last time. Sometimes we go into these in some detail, but we've got a lot to get through this evening. So if everyone's happy having read them, agreed? Thank you very much. And to confirm that the business in Part 1 will be considered in public and any Part 2 items will be in private, but I don't think we've actually got any Part 2 items as such. All right. So item 5, I think we're going to put back because Ian's not here, so we'll go straight to item 6. This was an issue raised primarily by Councillor Bridges, which was extremely helpful on a previous occasion, about first aid awareness and training. And it was really more to do with the first aid side of things, very much. Health and safety is a massive topic, but it really was more to do with the first aid awareness and training. So, James, I think if you are going to deal with that and help us with it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is James Wright. I manage the Council's Health and Safety team among a few other departments, just to give you a brief summary of the report I've prepared for you. So that the team is comprises of 4 people when we're fully staffed, and we act as the Council's competent health and safety advisors. Since pre-pandemic, they've not been fully staffed. We've encountered some recruitment issues. To give you a flavour of the things we do, so we write and maintain the Council's health and safety management system, which is predominantly the policies and standards that need to be achieved to ensure we are compliant with statutory legislation. And as part of that, we maintain a number of other systems, such as you've probably heard of the Restricted Persons Register. There's a number of benefits associated with that. And we provide lots of advice, guidance, coaching and mentoring to managers and staff alike, depending on the queries they come to us with, or some that we may find in the course of our sort of monitoring activities. As part of that, we also collaborate with lots of other departments. To give some of the things we've collaborated on recently is the hybrid working policy, to make sure that's that's functional and working. The alcohol and drugs testing programme that we've recently started, we initiated that. I don't know if you're aware of the new fire extinguishers we're looking to get in the Civic as a cost saving and also easier to maintain and manage for staff, and also the move to providing tools for housing repairs, so we have much better control over the risk associated with that. We'll also do a fair bit of performance monitoring, so we have a number of key performance indicators that we agreed with the senior managers representing each of the directorates, and we complete a number of audits on key risk areas as well. All of that information we discuss at our quarterly Hillingdon Health and Safety Group meeting, which is again represented by senior management of each directorate and other key partners such as facilities management, where we discuss and review those and make strategic decisions about how we might move things forward. And then the big bit that we do, the other half, is delivery of training. So we provide both health and safety, fire safety and first aid training for council staff. We do have a couple of income targets totaling just over £40,000 to meet as part of that. So the broad spread of courses that we do give us flexibility for staff to attend, but also we can sell those spaces to local businesses. Schools are our predominant customer. So there's approximately 10 different courses that we deliver, the majority of first aid, and that includes blended learning as part of the council's drive towards digitisation. Just to give you an idea of how much training we do, so over the course of 22-23, we delivered in total about 122 different courses and trained nearly 950 people. And the resident benefit of that is that their services aren't affected by ill health, injury and financial implications.
Councillor Bridges.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, James, for a very thorough report. It was very informative. I just wanted to ask a question on actual incidents. Do you, or indeed your colleagues, log incidents that occur on our premises, either it be in the Civic or the library, as and when these incidents occur, and do you review those incidents in how you think it's best to improve after those have occurred?
Yes, we do. So all members of staff who have access to the intranet report those incidents as they occur. If they don't, then their managers might report it on their behalf. So we see all of those centrally, and we monitor all those the ones we're really interested in, the ones that are considered work-related, and they fluctuate from quarter to quarter. And it's one of the statistics that we review on a quarterly basis as part of our KPIs in the Hillingdon Health and Safety Group, and we look for trends, and therefore we can see what we can do about them. So yeah, we do monitor and we do investigate.
Thank you very much for the answer. If I could just turn to our facilities in particular, which are public-facing. We have a number of committee rooms, as I mentioned at the last meeting, where I feel in particular we don't have enough signposting when it comes to things like defibrillators or first aid kits, be it in a reception, downstairs, or indeed these rooms, and maybe perhaps some of our other public buildings such as libraries. Do you feel that there is sufficient signage in those areas? Do you think improvements can be made?
I'm not familiar with all of our council buildings and what they have on offer. I think we'd have to do perhaps a review to see if there is. I know that in our committee rooms here, for example, the arrangements are, there's a notice over there to contact security, and the security are out of hours first aid providers, if you like. So if there was someone requested, there may be an initial discussion as to what the nature of the incident would be, and then they would bring relevant first aid kits and defibrillators with them if so deemed. Outside of the committee rooms, all the first aiders in the Civic Centre and the quadrants, which we're doing a review at the moment, they have individual bum bags with a few initial bits in there, so they can deal with it initially. Then there's further stocks if they need to, and they can also call on colleagues to fetch the defibrillator if needed. One of the things we do need to do, as we're required by legislation, is to sort of promote our arrangements, if you like, or discuss with staff what our arrangements are. So that's who the first aiders are, who to contact, and where to obtain first aid kits. And that's for our staff. It's provided on the internet as well as in our public buildings. It's listed on receptions and things like that for libraries.
Thank you, James, for the report. It was really useful. I note that sort of from my own work, outside of council work, that there's a lot of offering in terms of mental health training courses. and there's been an increase in sort of mental health awareness training and also training in sort of workplace mental health well-being. I'm just wondering if that's thought about or indeed if that's encouraged or offered, because across the board there's generally been an increase in mental health issues in the workplace.
So there's a different team that deal with mental health first aid. I do know that it is, from my own experiences as a manager, it's discussed and with our sort of managers' monthly roundup emails that we get and all staff emails, and there are courses that are available. So we have an in-house person, an in-house officer who actually delivers that mental health first aid training, but it's not something I'm involved with directly.
On a much more basic level, really, and it was following up from something that Councillor Bridges just said. In terms of those areas, I mean, this is a vast building, and we have members of the public coming in to different parts of it. And I was hearing today, in particular, about some aspects of people coming in with regard to homelessness and being in very considerable distress when they come and talk to officers in the homelessness reception or home allocation reception. And there have been incidents which have largely been talked down, but they could have been a lot worse and could have ended up with injury. And again, it's this notion of knowing where things are and knowing who to go to that I think we'd quite like some reassurance on, and whether or not we need more obvious signage or more obvious... I mean, if we spoke to various people, officers and employees of the council in different departments, would they know who their first aid, officer or connection person was, and would they know where to go to get equipment, let alone for things like defibrillators and so forth? But just on if anything, heaven forbid, did happen in terms of someone being attacked, and it's not something that's never happened before, because it has. Are you happy with the level of knowledge and the level of equipment we've got?
So, if all the processes are working, it should be fine. I'll say we have notices up in the committee rooms. Obviously, take contact security, and that would be the first point of call. Sometimes it would be down to the event host, if you like, to make sure there are adequate first aid arrangements as well. In the rest of the building and other reception areas, I'm pretty sure there's signposts in there as the contact security, the first port of call, that kind of stuff, and where we have different receptions. In other areas of the building, we advertise the first aiders on the internet, and also as part of the induction program as well. So we have the corporate induction checklist that managers should use for new starters, and one of the key things is to discuss with them the first aid arrangements and to show them how to locate the first aiders, which are on the internet, etc., etc. So facilities management have responsibility for first aid provision in the civic centres. They are the premise manager, and we are assisting them reviewing the first aid arrangements and cover at the moment, because with hybrid working, it presents a unique set of challenges to making sure we've got adequate cover at all times. But I do know that sometimes when we're conducting audits, and when we do look at induction checklist completion, etc., sometimes where they haven't been completed, then staff may well fall into the gap where they're not aware of first aid arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. It's always encouraging to hear that safety is paramount and of our staff and visitors and others who use the building. I had two thoughts, really, and they are just thoughts. They never come out as questions, I'm sorry. One is around kind of the standard given to those who are using council buildings who aren't council staff, or where there isn't maybe a security set up like there is at the Civic, and how we brief and support those who are third parties just using a hall or one of our committee rooms, for example. I know the security number is the first port of call, but how we give a little bit of extra knowledge that may equip them. And secondly, how we ensure there's consistency of practice across all council sites, and also affiliated kind of groups, maybe like our community centres, which although we don't manage and run, we have an input in as a local authority supporting them.
So just a good question actually. So just as an example, so many of our libraries do have sort of function rooms which they hire out, etc. And they are actually they were discussing with me the other day just to review their booking terms and conditions, because some of them were sort of alluding that the library staff would cover all their first aid needs for them, but of course the libraries have assessed their first aid needs for what goes on in the library, not necessarily that. So that we are tightening, or they are tightening their terms and conditions to make it explicit. They have responsibility for making sure they have adequate provision. It's for them to seek, relevant guidance to make sure that they have access to that.
All right, thank you. Actually, just one of the things you were saying earlier on, given the nature of how working has changed, is there any monitoring of if certain staff members are designated first aiders, or being the first aid link in their department, and yet they're working from home? Is there any sort of monitoring of where they are, and is there more effectiveness if they're at the office than if they're at home, or is there no difference, or what?
So yeah, this is work in progress at the moment. So we've done something similar with our fire marshals to make sure we can evacuate the building safely in an emergency. And just as an example, what we've done with fire marshals is what we're starting to translate over to the first aid side of things as well. So what we've, for most, just so you take the main sort of phase one of the building, we've got the quadrants there, and we've identified that we need 6 fire marshals for each quadrant, and they each commit to being in the office 2 days per week to make sure we've got at least always 2 fire marshals covering the building at any one. Sometimes there might be more, but at least we've always got 2. We're reviewing our first aid. Just as an example, we might decide we need 3 per quadrant, and they each are in 2 days per week, so something similar. And then what we set up with fire marshals, that there's a senior manager monitoring. There's a rota sheet we've got which is shared amongst them all, and a senior manager has responsibility for each quadrant to sort of dip into that and to make sure people have allocated which days they're coming in for the following week, so we have a process of monitoring.
All right, thank you. Well, unless there's any further questions, it was a really good topic for us to pick up on. I know what I wanted to ask you. Some little while ago, I think it was British Heart Foundation, were placing for either free or relatively limited cost defibrillators. I think it was, maybe it wasn't, but it was some charity related to it. Because the idea was that there weren't many around, or at least there should have been. I don't mean here, but in many different public buildings. And there was a bit of a campaign to get them, A, known how to be used, but B, to get more of them, not quite per square foot, but certainly across different buildings. Is that something that you've looked at to get them in greater volume, maybe even?
Yeah. So each premise manager has responsibility for undertaking their own first aid needs assessment, if you like. That determines what level of training their staff need, how many staff they need training, and also what equipment they're going to provide. The defibrillator isn't a must-have. You can have it, and they definitely save lives and make a massive difference. I know that as an example. I think all the schools have them now, because there was a bit of a campaign with the schools. I'm pretty sure all the libraries have them as well. I know that we've got down at the Hillingdon Road depot. We've got one here. So there's a mixture of, I think some have bought them, and there's some which have obtained through charitable means. But I haven't done any exercises to coordinate how many we've got in any of our corporate buildings and any of our buildings.
Okay, thank you. So, any other questions? Nope. Oh, Cascade.
Apologies if you've covered this already, but in the areas that I've been in the building, have you got, for people with disabilities, the chairs for the stairs and things?
No. What we have instead is evacuation lifts. So there's a lift in phase 1, and one of the lifts in phase 2 is an evacuation lift. And the idea is that if people have mobility issues, their initial part of their plan will be to go to one of the refuges, and then there they will stay. They'll phone main reception, which is where we coordinate our response from. We log where they are, and they're told basically to stay put. If there is an event where the fire started to encroach on that space, we may call them back and direct them to the evacuation lift, which we can go and get them out safely because the power source is protected, etc. But as the lift lobbies aren't protected themselves, we can't get them to wait in those areas. So that, if they get the all clear, we can go and let them out of the refuge as well.
I think going around the building, I suspect very strongly the building was built before requirements for the sort of disability requirements that there are now. It may be that 1976. There we go. You see, and it's a a lot of people have said before now that it's quite a labyrinth, this building, and it's usually accessed by going up some stairs. I often feel I'm in a very large and human game of snakes and ladders, because very often to get to somewhere you have to go up some stairs and then down some stairs, which is always quite exciting. But joking apart, I mean, I think that quite a lot of the building is probably going to be a challenging access issue anyway, and maybe that's something we need to look at in terms of the health and safety side of this topic that we've raised. But it's a good point that the councillor makes, and it's something we'll come back to. But thank you for that very straightforward answer. All right, look, thank you very much for that. It's very interesting. I think we'll come back to this on another occasion, because it's an interesting topic area to have a look at. Thank you very much. All right. So we can go to item 7, because Ian's not here yet. So, a fellow wearer of flashy red spectacles, which is good. James Lake on Treasury Management. I found this absolutely fascinating. You hear references to this area of work from Cabinet members. We used to hear it from Councillor Bianco. We now hear it a lot from Councillor Goddard. And actually knowing what on earth it really is all about is quite interesting and quite a challenge. So perhaps, James, if you can sort of take us through this and give us an explanation about what it's all about and why we do it and why we have to take notice of it.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to talk about Treasury Management, because it is an exciting operation which a council takes. I think I find it exciting because I enjoy it, but also it's really essential because it's sort of the backbone of the finances of the council. So it's really important that people sort of are aware of what we do on the Treasury side. So just in summary, so the rules around how councils operate their Treasury functions is set in statute. So it is that important. Not everybody's allowed to sort of go off and do their own thing. It's set in statute. You have to follow these rules. And we follow guidance issued by the public sector accounting body, CIPFA, so Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accounts. So statutes say you have to refer to the CIPFA codes of practice and follow the rules in those codes of practice. So in my report, CIPFA has done a sort of an all-encompassing definition of Treasury Management. But I think sort of basically Treasury Management is looking after the council's bank account, so all of, and the banking arrangements, all the cash flow monitoring in terms of when money's coming in, money's going out, etc. How we invest our money, how we borrow money, and probably more importantly, controlling the risks around all those activities, because we're talking millions and millions of pounds here every single day we're moving around. And there's a lot of control environment and a lot of risks associated with moving this money and looking after this money. So there's a big focus on risk management. And that's sort of quite key through everything we do. We've got a sort of a controlled approach to Treasury because we have to. And CIPFA again suggests we have to put out a Treasury Management Practices, which is basically a rule book of operations on how Treasury works. So I've included in the paper sort of the various Treasury Management Practices, which are things you need to cover and have rules set down. And Treasury Management Practice 1 is risk management. Again, that's sort of the key focus in terms of looking after the Treasury function. So if I can move on to sort of investments. So every day, the council has money in the bank account, and we need to do something with it. And the overarching guidance from DLUC is that we need to have our primary objective is security of the money we invest. So we need to make sure we put it somewhere. If we put £100 in, we need to be able to get £100 out. There's no sort of, not like on the pension fund, which Councillor Mathers and I sort of work on as well, where we've got a long-term view and we can invest in equities, and if markets go up and down, we ride it out, etc., etc. On the council's treasury side, it's much safer, much more controlled. We put £1 in, we need to get £1 out, because we need to have security that when we need that money, it's there. We can't sort of say, oh, let's leave it another year until the markets improve before we touch it. So first thing, security. Make sure we're investing in an entity where we know we're going to get the money back. The next thing is liquidity. So we need to be able to get access to our money when we need it. So we need to be able to pay our bills when they fall due. We need to pay the wages, pay benefits, pay suppliers, etc. So we can't, even if we've got £50 million, we can't tie it up for 5 years. We need to have a process where we've got a cash flow management so we know when we're going to be paying out this money. So we need certain investments that mature on certain days to match outflows, and instant access facilities so we can draw money as and when we need it. So that's our secondary concern, and then only after we've met security and liquidity do we think about yield. So if you've got same security, same liquidity, then you would pick the one that's paying the best interest rate effectively. Now, again, it's quite structured, so it's very structured. There's a list of places where we can invest our money. It's called a counterparty list, and everybody that's on there is assessed for their credit quality. And with that, we also allocate the amount of time we'll invest with any person, because obviously if they're really strong, we can invest longer periods. If we've got sort of slight concerns, it'll be a shorter period. And also the value we can invest with those. And by allocating a value to each entity, it forces you to diverse your money across. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket effectively. You're spreading your investments across a number of entities. In reality, we are really, really cautious, and currently we are only really using two sources of investment. So we use the Debt Management Account Deposit Facility, which is an arm of the UK government's Debt Management Office. So we're hoping the UK government aren't going to go bust and our money's going to be safe. And we put sort of fixed term deposits in there, so we might do a 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever the case is. And we also use AAA rated money market funds, so credit rated AAA, the highest credit rating. There should be no issues at all with these institutions. And they're money market funds, they're diversified, they invest in short-term instruments which are liquid and also very diversified through lots of counterparties. And there are very strict rules around how these money market funds are run and achieving that AAA rating. So the council currently is just using sort of super safe places to invest its investments. So I can go on and talk a bit more about how we sort of do credit assessments and things like that, but I'll answer questions later. I wanted to talk about the capital financing requirement, because I was asked to touch on this, because it's quite sort of a techie sort of concept, but I think it sort of features a lot, as you say, in cabinet reporting and when people talk about treasury management. So I've done a sort of a very simplified version of a CFR calculation. I'll put it in page 30 of the report. And I think the easiest way to probably explain it is like buying a house with an offset mortgage. So if I can just sort of go through that table. So in this table I've said, okay, the council... On page 30, yeah. So the council's gone out and they've spent £1 million on a property. So the first number in there, capital spend, £1 million. So if I align that to me buying a house, I've gone out and I've bought a house for £1 million, lucky me. I've then got money that goes against that, so capital receipts. So the council will sell assets off, and the money they get for selling those assets will go against other capital spend. So in my house analogy, I've sold my previous house and I've walked away from the selling of that house with £100,000 equity. So that goes towards the cost of my new house. Also, the council gets capital grants from government and other entities. They'll say, you know, we will give you some money to build some new roads, do something or other, some capital project. So the government will give us grants that we can spend against capital items. So again, my house buying analogy, mum and dad have given me £200,000 towards my new house. Great, thanks. And the next thing we need to consider is MRP, minimum revenue provision, which is effectively the council setting aside money to pay off this loan in the future. So again, in my house analogy, it's in your repayment mortgage, that's the principal you're paying off every month in your mortgage. So in my example here, so far I've paid off £100,000 off of my £1 million house. So my CFR, my underlying need to borrow, the capital financing requirement is £600,000 after I've bought the house and I've allocated all my other resources against offsetting it. The amount I actually need to borrow is £600,000. However, like an offset mortgage, the council has money in reserves. So if I had an offset mortgage, I may have £300,000 in savings, which the bank will offset against the amount of I actually borrow from them. So the council has, in this example, £300,000 in reserves. So it doesn't actually necessarily need to go out and borrow that 600,000. It also has £100,000 in working capital, so £100,000 in its current account, if you like. So the bottom line figure is actually £200,000. That's what we need. But I need some money to live. I've got to pay my utilities. I've got to pay for food. I've got to pay for a car, etc. And the council has to pay for the things it needs to pay for. It's suppliers, wages, benefits, etc., etc. So we borrow more than that minimum because we don't want nothing in the bank account. So in this example, that leaves me with £100,000 in my bank account, which is, in this example, my working capital. So that's the sort of it's sort of tricky, but that's the concept of the CFR. And I think sort of using an offset mortgage and using your own savings is probably the simplest way to sort of explain that concept. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. Now, again, and also just you might be wondering, well, why don't we go out and borrow all of that money? The reason is generally, if we went out and borrowed the extra money, we would be paying higher costs for borrowing than you would get on investment returns. So it would cost us more to borrow that extra money. And then also, in my example, I'd have an extra £300,000 in the bank, which I need to try and invest. I've got to find a home for that. I've got to find somewhere safe for it. And, and then you struggle because you'd have so much money that you would struggle to put it in anywhere safe. So the idea is we use what we call internal borrowing, so our reserves, to offset against our capital spend. So that's the concept of the CFR, the capital financer requirement. Now, in terms of borrowing, again, we've got a bit like the investments with security, liquidity and yield. We've got another sort of three tenets, if you like. Borrowing needs to be prudent, so it needs to make sense. It needs to have good value. So again, do we need another school? Do we need another library? Do we need another leisure centre? Whatever the case is. So, we have to think about these capital projects. Do we need to borrow for this particular capital project? Does it make sense? Is it affordable? So can I afford to pay the debt back? Can I afford to pay the interest, etc.? So that will all go into the budget monitoring and the assessment. And is it sustainable? So are we going to be able to manage this asset over the long term? Are we going to continue to pay for that in sort of 5, 10, 15 years' time? So we need to make sure we meet all those criteria before we actually go out and borrow for a capital project. In terms of where we get our money, again, we go to the government. So they have a facility for local authorities called the Public Works Loan Board. And we use those for most of our fixed rate debt because basically they're cheap. I mean, it's linked to what the UK government pays, so it's cheaper than going to the market generally, and it's quite flexible in terms of being able to repay it and the types of loans you can get and the structures, and it's very easy. You can go there, I can ring them up today and I'll have the money in the bank in 2 days' time sort of thing. Whereas if I went out to commercially, I'd have to spend thousands in legal fees, etc., and then we might not get the same rate. We would be tied down into the terms of the loan. So these days, PWLB is the sort of the preferred source of borrowing for our longer term borrowing. We also go out and use other local authorities because other local authorities have got spare cash, and rather than giving it to the debt management account people, they can give it to us, for example, and earn a slightly higher interest rate. But for us, it's cheaper than going to the PWLB. And that's short-term debt, generally with less than 1 year. So we might get a 3-month loan, a 6-month loan, a 9-month loan, etc. And use that, and we class that as variable rate because it's less than 1 year. So when you're renewing it quite regularly, so the rate is changeable. So we use local authorities to borrow from as well. And then we've got some historic bank loans back in the day, many years ago, that we've taken out, which the rates are compared to today not too bad. So we have some just normal bank loans, if you like. We have fixed and variable rate debt. We want fixed debt because we want budget certainty, but also we want variable rate debt because arguably some variable rate debt, it's potentially cheaper than fixed rate debt because you're paying a premium to have that certainty. But we only have an element of variable rate debt because we don't want to be exposed to interest rates going up and down all the time. But we try and align the debt with the sort of investment value. So if your debt costs are going up, your investments that you're holding investments is also going up at the same price. So they sort of act as a sort of hedge against each other. So that's sort of how we manage that interest rate risk, by having some fixed, some variable, and then managing the interest rate risk by having a similar value of loans to investments. We also need to be mindful of refinancing. So again, we don't want all of our loans maturing in one single year. You know, if all of our loans portfolio was maturing now, we'd be paying through the roof to try and refinance it. So we stagger our maturities of our loans. And just a couple of other sort of notes. You're not allowed to borrow purely for investment return. And as always, you're only allowed to borrow for capital purposes. So, you know, just you can't use it to sort of support your revenue position. So if we're spending loads of money on social care, we can't just borrow money to pay for social care. It has to be against a capital project. In terms of reporting, we do lots of reporting. So daily, the Treasury team will come in, they'll look at the bank account, as I mentioned before, they'll look at it, where are we, they'll do the cash flow monitoring, etc. But they'll look at the bank account and they'll say, do we have excess money in our bank account? Do we need to invest it, or are we overdrawn? Do we need to pull back some money from some of our instant access facilities to sort of bring us to a zero position? Basically, we want to end the day with nothing in the bank account, or very little in the bank account, because we want to maximise investment returns by having it invested. And obviously, we don't want to pay overdraft fees. So that's just sort of normal practice. You don't pay overdraft. If you're overdrawn in the morning, you don't pay over fees as long as you settle the position during the course of the day. So that's sort of normal business. You look at your position in the morning and then either invest money or pull money back to cover it. Now that report, there's a big sign-off there. So there's a cash flow for the day. There's what we call our counterparty list, which lists out all the counterparties where it's invested. So it demonstrates that it's all diverse investments. There's the logic of the decision. So somebody in Treasury prepares that, somebody else in the team checks it to make sure that they're happy. They check all the underlying transactions, check if we're paying money over, do the bank account details, agree, etc., etc. Then that will come to two bank signatories, normally Andy Evans, the Section 151 Corporate Director of Finance, and myself, but obviously we've got other bank signatories and other people, senior people in finance. So it will go to them. They'll check that as a sort of a sense check, but also check the underlying transactions. Okay, are the bank account details, do they agree, etc. So we act as bank signatories and authorisation to then say, yes, we're approving this Treasury investment decision. And then it'll go to another person who then actually presses the button on the bank account, who checks to make sure that it's all been set up properly in the bank account again. So I think there's sort of about 5 different checks before any money leaves the bank account for Treasury activities, and 2 very senior people to make sure the Treasury decision is a sensible one. So that happens every day. Every week, the Treasury team produce a report for management to sort of tell them what's gone on during the week, what's going to happen the next week, planning who's doing what jobs, who's signing off, who's covering the Treasury, who's covering the approvals, etc., etc. Any sort of thoughts about borrowing, you know, if we're looking for money, if we're not looking for money, etc. So there's sort of a high-level report that goes to management on the activities. Every month, we report to Cabinet on sort of an overview of all the Treasury activities, how much we've got in investments, borrowing, rates of return, etc. like that. And every quarter now, we actually do a new requirement this year now is to do even more reporting. So we have to give an awful lot more information, sort of things around the potential indicators, which are the limits we set out in our strategy. And then annually, goes to Cabinet, and full council for approval is the Treasury management strategy, and that's the full strategy of what we're doing on Treasury in terms of investment and borrowing and our programme for the year. So there's quite a lot of reports. There are other ad hoc reports that go here, but they're the sort of the key reports, I guess. And I'll just touch on budget monitoring as well. Obviously, the capital programme feeds into Treasury, so the capital team will say, this is what we think we're going to do in terms of our capital programme. These are all the things, the projects we want to buy, invest or borrow for, and there's the subsequent sort of reserves figures, etc., etc. So then we get an underlying need to borrow. So we'll go that, and we'll come back and they'll say, okay, right, we believe it's going to cost you this much in debt repayments, this much in interest. Based on what you've told us as well, we should be having this amount in our bank account, so we should get this much in investment returns. So we will feed back into the wider MTFF and budget monitoring. So we're part of it. We're one line of it, along with all the other services. But that gets fed into it, and I guess if they will look at that and they'll say, can we afford it? Do we need to delay some capital programmes. This is too expensive. Come back to us. Okay, let's reduce the borrowing or rephase this capital programme to push it along a couple of years, and then we'll rehash the numbers and it'll go back into the MTFF process. Excuse me. So that's sort of budget monitoring. So yeah, that's a sort of a whirlwind tour through the paper, but happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Just a general question to start with, really. I mean, given that this function is, and you said it right at the beginning, is to a large extent designed to be quite restrictive, because the function of councils is not the same as companies, and it's not the same as other commercial organisations. We know that there are certain services we have to provide. We know there are certain services we'd like to provide as a generically as a council. And councils up and down the country have to do that. So given that there are these restrictions, and I'll come on to institutions in a moment, and I'm absolutely not making any political points at all, because it happens on all sides. How is it, and I don't necessarily mean that we need to go on a very great deal of time about this, but given the restrictions and given the caution that you've talked about, I suppose really for reassurance, how is it that councils can get into really difficult financial positions where they're almost going bust? I mean, they get rescued, but where that happens, when we've got these treasury management rules and these regulations and these lots and lots of different overviews and backstops and so forth. It's just maybe interesting for at least public out there, if not us, to understand how things can go so badly wrong. I mean, I understand about inflation and interest and the change that happens in the commercial world that affects us anyway. But with this amount of protection going on, it just asks the question, well, how does it go so badly wrong? In a few words.
I guess some of that is because of a revenue position, so nothing to do with capital programs. So people just haven't got enough money. You know, inflation, all these other costs are going up, and government funding isn't meeting the demands from a revenue perspective. So it could be that that's why they're running out of money. It tends not to be because people have invested money into a bank that's gone wrong. I mean, but there are. I mean, one of the things I mentioned, if you're borrowing, it needs to be prudent. And if people go out and invest, borrow money and then invest in something that isn't prudent and sustainable and affordable, and they haven't done their proper due diligence at the front end, then those things can go wrong. In a few words.
The other thing is we do know that in the past history, if you turn your mic off a minute, we do know in past, well, two things we know, that the rules tend to dictate where local authorities can invest or can place their money fairly restrictively, and indeed I think certain institutions have to get onto the Treasury list or be approved anyway, if that's right. And if that is correct, in circumstances where financial institutions do get into difficulty, I mean, we had it with was it the Icelandic banks? That's kind of just one of those things that the anticipation was that they would be fine. All the checks were done on them. Everyone thought everything was okay, but it just happened that in their own internal ways of working, it all went wrong. So there's no. It's difficult to have a guarantee, I suppose. Is that where we are?
That's exactly where we are. Yeah. No Treasury activity is not without risk. It doesn't matter how safe you think an institution is, it can still go wrong. I mean, you know, there are cleverer people than me around in the financial world in 2008 who were investing in Lehman's and doing whatever they were doing and all those really weird financial instruments that thought they were great, and they all went wrong. So yeah, there's no risk. Treasury management is not without risk. We just do our best to try and manage and control those risks by putting the controls. And Hillingdon as a council is very vanilla, very plain, very safe as well. So we're not necessarily going out there and doing some of the other. I mean, you've got sort of capacity to do things. So some other people may be taking more risk. They may be investing in lower grade institutions than we are. They may be investing for longer in different things. But for Hillingdon, it's very, very plain, very, very safe.
All right, thank you. Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, one of the exciting risks is never a good combination, is it? But one of the more volatile risks is definitely interest rates and inflation. Over recent times, we've had a massive period of volatility across the world, but particularly in the UK and Europe. I suppose with all those restrictions and processes, I'm interested in kind of the agility that you may have in order to cushion some unexpected change. I have another supplementary that I'll use separately, but you spoke a lot about hedging and the need to do things, and obviously there's a lot of legislation, but in very volatile times, apart from being very busy, are there kind of either lessons learned from recent volatility or things that council, local government, treasury takes into consideration for periods like this which are less known to us?
I guess from an inflation perspective, inflation, you need to... The risk about inflation is the fact you're not getting your investment return, which is matching inflation. So effectively, your capital value is being reduced by inflation, rather than you still get £100 back, but what you can do with £100 is less. So managing that is obviously now in terms of there is inflation, but interest rates have gone up to sort of compensate with that to a point. So managing inflation isn't necessarily, I guess, a key on the treasury function, because we're just trying to make sure our money's safe more than anything, and it would be a sort of natural increase in investment return to offset higher inflation. And of course, inflation, if you're inflating your debt away, then that's obviously a positive thing, because your debt's becoming less expensive from an inflation perspective. I'm not sure that answers your question.
It alludes to some bits. I think you underestimate maybe how much work that we underestimate how much work the Treasury team's been doing in the recent couple of years with the volatility of things. And I know that hedging is the ideal, but that's definitely not impossible with inflation at 10%. Definitely not possible with inflation at 10%. The other, if I may, Chair, was about cash flow. So we're experiencing a time, I would suggest, where there are higher council tax arrears, maybe business rates arrears if we go into recession, or if we've been in recession, who knows these days. There's a possibility of business failure. I know we have some larger businesses that are more robust, or who during the pandemic may have wanted rates relief and are still suffering some of those impacts of things. How much does those kind of economic or local struggles impact cash flow and your ability to ensure that we are, again, I know the secure is the first thing, but also making sure that we're not seeing huge depreciation of assets or general depreciation.
I guess from a cash flow perspective, we are interacting with lots of different departments around the council to sort of understand where the money's coming from. I mean, you can imagine that there are thousands of sources of cash coming in and thousands of sources of cash coming out. So we try and talk to as many people as we can to understand all the big cash flows, etc. And we monitor that, we forecast that, and we check trends, etc. So if the council tax people said, yeah, we're going to collect £30 million a month, and we see that it's starting to go in 29, 28, 27, then we would be raising questions, what's going on here? So then we would raise that at sort of a corporate level and then factor that into our cash flow management, if you like. We do have sort of capacity because we're still under borrowed and we've got our reserves, etc., to sort of help from a cash flow perspective in terms of making sure we've got money in the bank account. So, but we do monitor the cash flow position more on a daily, and we forecast sort of throughout the year and then even into the next year as well on an operational basis. We do high level cash flow for the MTFF for 5 years, but really at a really operational sort of granular level, that's happening every day, and the team are monitoring that every day. I can't sort of necessarily sort of say how it might be affecting the sort of corporate collection team. I probably need to talk to them directly and get an answer on that, but we look at the more holistic position. Okay, how much is coming in, rather than sort of the individual sort of debt issues, I guess. As long as we're getting in the money that they've said they're going to get in, then that's what we factored into our cash flow.
All right, Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, James, for quite a comprehensive report. My question is actually going to double-click on what Councillor Mather says in terms of cash flow reporting. Just to pick on a couple of areas, maybe like accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory. Is there any, how closely do you work with like those departments in terms of managing the working capital? So what I mean by that is, do we look at, you know, in terms of accounts payable, if we've got like 60 days terms, they're paying them too early, like in 10 days. Do we go back to them and say, hang on guys, you've got 60 days terms, you want to make the best of your working capital, pay them in 60 days. Similarly, in accounts receivable and collecting something like council tax, are we being like too generous with people saying you need to pay your council tax within like 30 days, we're giving them like 60, 120, whatever days, so you need to be maybe not more aggressive, more proactive in collecting this money because it's really damaging our cash flow and working capital. And similarly with inventory, I'm trying to think of an example which is not related to my day job. Have we just got like tyres stuck in a warehouse somewhere, you know, indefinitely? That again is tying up capital money, so we should be like more actively managing that to make the best of our inventory. I don't know, pencils, computers, I'm trying to think of high value items. But that's my question, is how actively do we work with the departments to manage the working capital? Thank you, Chair.
I'll start with the easy one. Inventory, the council's inventory really, or what we class as inventory, is very minimal. So that's not, because I think we have some grits or something in the salt grits, you know, for gritting the roads, and we have some stocking, some of the golf courses, crisps and food and stuff like that. It's so immaterial to the council now that we just expense it as revenue. We don't even hold it on the balance sheet as inventory. In terms of paying out, the council has standard payment procedures, and it will pay out on as per the terms. I think the systems are set up to make sure they pay within the 30-day credit terms, so they won't pay too early, they won't pay too late. If the invoice is approved and on the system, they'll pay within those terms. In terms of collecting money, that's a different matter. So again, I guess the teams, I don't know how they would work in terms of the debt collection teams and how aggressive and how fast they collect money. I couldn't really comment on that, but we will look at the position, and if the council tax have told us they're going to collect X amount, we make sure, you know, that's what they've told us is what we're getting in, and then we'll highlight any issues. If, you know, why have you said this? Oh, this has happened, and then we adjust our cash flow accordingly. But it's more, yeah, I guess in terms of how aggressive people are collecting money and how they're managing their debt collection, that sort of doesn't sort of fall under my remit. It's just the fact from my perspective is, are we getting what they told us they're going to get?
Thank you. Councillor Batt.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a two-part question on investments, if I may. I know that you mentioned about daily and weekly treasury reporting and review of our bank account and cash flow forecast. In terms of reviewing investments, I know you do it annually, but given the sort of economic volatility, I'm just wondering how often you do review investments, because even money market funds, for example, could be risky with interest rates increasing. It could lag and lead to lower returns, whereas bonds are a bit more safer. And I'm wondering to what extent you might use external advisors to advise you on our investment strategy. And the second question really was about ethical and sustainable investing, and whether or not we have any policies in place for that, where we don't perhaps invest in certain sectors like fossil fuels, and we actively seek out investments that have positive social and environmental impacts.
Well, we do have advisors. We have a company that we use who assess the market and all the counterparties, and they look at it constantly. So that obviously you've got the credit ratings, which are quite slow, to be honest. So they always make sure we check the credit ratings of any organisation. We also have something, credit default swaps, which is almost like an insurance policy against organisations defaulting, and they're sort of priced by the minute in the market. So the advisors have got access to Bloomberg, and they'll check the prices of all the people that they recommend to be on the counterparty list. So they'll see if there's a spike in sort of someone having to pay extra for their, because there's more risk around them, and they will highlight it, and they will say, okay, we need to do something about this. Again, I think I've mentioned in my report as well about bail-in risk and bail-out risk. So now the local authority is on the hook if a bank goes bust. So whereas before, well, I think sort of 2008, the government stepped in and bailed out people like NatWest, etc. Whereas now they're suggesting that institutional investors like ourselves will have to be part of that bail out things. So you get your equity, your bonds, and then people like us will start to lose some of our money as well. So they're not going to step in now like they did before. They're going to just use money. So again, we look at the advisors and analyse the balance sheet. So they say, how much equity buffer have we got? How much bond buffer have we got? And then sort of where do we sit on that scale in terms of safety, if you like. So again, they will set up a limit and there will terms, etc., based on that buffer. And of course, you just got market intelligence as well. I don't remember the Credit Suisse and the Silicon Valley Bank when they went bust. We were concerned as a council. Our advisors were being slightly more robust, saying, "Oh no, it's quite localised. It's not going to affect us." But we acted that day and we said, actually, we don't want to do this from a council. We think it's too risky. So we pulled everything out of all of our money market funds and just put it in the UK government. So we look at that constantly. That's sort of daily. We're looking at that. So in terms of that investment, in terms of ESG, again, the Treasury side, it's not like the council pension fund. We do an awful lot in pension investments where we have investments in companies. The council, we're looking at UK government, so we're kind of hoping the UK government do environmental and social governance issues, and in terms of our money market funds and banks, etc., that are on our list, they're all signatories to sort of UK Stewardship Code or Net Zero, etc. So we try and make sure that everybody that we've got is signed up to a code of practice, which is investing sort of sustainably, environmentally friendly, ESG friendly. So that's it. We don't, because it's very short term. We put money in, taking it out the next day. You're not like a holder of an investment in a company like we are in a pension fund, where we can actually engage with that company and say, you need to improve what you're doing in human rights, for example, which we do on the pension fund. But for the council's treasury, it's just like putting money in the government and in these money market funds, which are very, very short term in nature. So we just make sure that they're all signed up to a sort of the relevant ethical codes, etc. So that's as much as we do on the Treasury from an ESG perspective. But I don't think we can do any more because we're not active owners of shares. We just make sure they're doing the right thing.
All right. Yes? Okay, thank you. Councillor Sansapuri.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier, Council used to invest in foreign banks to get the more interest rate. What is our present policy on that, please?
Currently we're not. We do have the ability to invest in some foreign banks, but they've got to meet a very high credit rating. But currently, investing in banks is not worth it at the moment. One, half of them don't want your money. Two, there's too much credit risk, so we'd rather put it in the UK government and give it to a bank. And equally, they're not even paying as much as the UK government. So I'm not going to give it to a bank with a lower rating, paying less money than the UK government. So yeah, we don't at the moment.
All right, and finally, Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had a thought actually listening to some of the other councillors. Is there any scope to maybe work together with other councils in an area such as borrowing to get more favourable rates? So, if I'm thinking with maybe half of my pensions committee hat on, if a couple of councils got together and wanted to borrow, or is it strictly governed that that's not possible? So again, just trying to see if there's any avenue that we've explored where it, can get more favourable interest rates, or even, looking at something like counterparty risk, tied together with other councils and just work with, say, one or two banks and say, we'll give you all this business and you give us better rates in terms of like an interest, not overdraft, that's personal, you know what I mean? So looking at it from that area, is it so highly governed that that's just not, an option? Thank you.
It is an option. We have looked at the government even tried to set up something called the Municipal Bond Agency, and the idea was lots of the local authorities would pull together, go out to the market and issue a bond. But in the end, it just didn't work. They couldn't get it to work. The legals around it, the interest from other local authorities, etc. And I can't remember which body it was now, but they spent hundreds of thousands of pounds in research trying to pull this together, and it didn't work in the end. And again, just going out in the legals and trying to actually get the banks are really quite expensive. So we have looked at it, but it's just not feasible from a legal perspective, a cost perspective, or an availability perspective.
All right, well, that's very helpful. Thank you. As I said at the start, having read your report and having spoken to you before on other matters, you have an extraordinary enthusiasm and knowledge about these things, and convey that to us. And you can see the interest that we've got in understanding this. And it's great because very often we'll hear about these things being spoken of in council or in other areas, and of course it's being spoken of by people who deal with it all the time. But to have a bit more of an understanding is really very important, and has helped us greatly. So thank you very much for coming along, and we'll definitely have you back to expand on this sort of thing in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting
All
me.
right, thank you. I'm thinking about timing, and I think if Marion doesn't mind, we'll take Ian next, because we think we'll be a little bit longer with your section. So that's not to say that we're going to shortchange Ian, but we had a report from him last time, and it's to an extent a bit of a follow-up from that as well, I think. So, and there is quite a lot to get through as far as your section is concerned. So, all right, thank you. Thanks, James. Thank you, Ian. And welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry I was late.
No, not at all.
I guess the report provides you with the data, but I'll run through it if that would be helpful. From the 1st of January 23 to the 15th of September, there was 3,872 members' inquiries, and there was 3,450 service requests. Of the 3,872 members' inquiries, 3,242 were from councillors and 630 from members of parliament. That figure actually compares reasonably. If you add the two together, it pretty much compares with what happened the same period the year before, which was 7,707 members' inquiries in total. I think that I've provided you with things that we're working on that needs to be done to the system. And I guess really from the purpose of this meeting is to ask for your feedback, whether it's done today or it's done at a later date. That's not a problem. I've got a new director who's the Chief Digital Officer, and what he's doing is reviewing all the various sort of IT information and equipment that we have, with the means of trying to pull it all together and put together an improvement plan, or a plan generally, to try and improve what there is currently in place. But whatever any changes that we do make has to be cost effective and must be best value for the organisation. I could kind of like ramble on a bit more about that, but there is one thing that I would ask for this committee, which is there is an Appendix B, whereby Councillor Bennett has spent some time with the IT colleagues in developing icons for the service requests, and I would ask if this committee would be prepared to approve that, so we can then implement that almost not overnight, but within a matter of days, so that it can be in place. And I've put an example of the type of icons that would be in place. I'm very happy to take questions.
It was certainly something that Councillor Bennett on the last occasion was very keen on, in terms of being able to have a kind of easier identification of areas. Where the extent to which we can, as it were, recommend a change in that sense, I'm not entirely certain about, but we'll deal with that in 1 second. But I think that there is a bigger piece of work to be going on with here, and I think a number of others do too. The whole move to this new way of dealing with things has been great, and there's been a lot of advantages, but equally, inevitably, we find a lot of user difficulties, not just for us as members, but also for our residents. So there's a kind of twin approach, really, or at least a twin area of not even concern, but of things that have come up in terms of how the two sets of people, members and residents, use the new system. And I think that given the work that we do on this committee and the work that Councillor Bridges does on his committee, there is, and we haven't really thought this through entirely, but there is a kind of joint piece of work that could be done in terms of looking into the experience of members and of residents, and putting that together and presenting that essentially to you as a sequence of issues that needs to be looked at. Now, some of them are going to be very easy, I suspect, or some of them may be just getting used to the system. But I think we need to talk about that later on under the work programme. But just to really say to you that we do pick up and have picked up a number of different challenges for the two main, well, I suppose only in a sense, users in terms of that. I mean, it's very interesting today, for example. I spent a lot of time in the contact centre, and I know we'll talk about this later on. I know colleagues went earlier in the week, but I did my tour today. And what struck me was that while a number of our officers were on the phone, because I was able to sit there and listen to what they were doing, or at least listen to what the resident was asking for or talking about. That because they've got a similar screen to that which we have for resolution of or making requests or whatever, they were getting through the solutions quite quickly, because some of the requests really were more to do with the sort of thing we would hope people were doing on my account, but inevitably, and it's not confined to any particular group or age or anything. I think it's just folk who are trying to talk to somebody and tell them what's happened, which means that possibly they've tried to use the system and it's been too interesting or challenging or difficult or what, I don't really know what. But they talked to the operator very, very quick, were able to talk to the operator. And the operator just went and did it and sent the request or the, can you get rid of this sofa or whatever it was, that was one thing, very, very quickly. So there's, and the answer really, talking to the people in the contact centre, was achieving a balance between all sorts of people who will use the technology and use it well, and those who probably could anyway, but nevertheless would prefer to have someone to talk to. And essentially, as one lady said to me, one of our workforce in the contact centre, it's almost as if this person is sitting next to me saying, can you find this out for me, or can you report this for me? And it was, and within minutes, less really, she'd done it. So there's a whole piece of work around getting people used to things. It's not been going that long, so I think that is something that comes out of it. But let's just deal with this issue about Appendix B. I mean,
so the Select Committee can make recommendations, as you know, because you do that quite often. Any final decision on the actual look or whatever, you'd have to take through your normal political approvals through the cabinet member if you need to do that. But clearly the committee can endorse or recommend that he would like to see those changes to Ian, and he can take them forward.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it seems sensible. I don't know what everybody else thinks. The suggestion essentially in Appendix B, but as Mark says, I think it's got to be. I suspect because there'll be a feeling of making sure that at least the cabinet member understands what's going on, and I think that if you're able to take away the fact that we see this as being a sensible solution or a sensible addition to the whole setup, then if it can be done, as it were, between officers and the cabinet member, then great.
That's all I needed. Thank you.
Any other questions on anything? Councillor Gard.
Just one question on that particular. When you do the rollout of that, will there be some training? Because I mean, all we can see is a picture at the moment with the, I don't understand enough about it to say how good or how it would work, rather than it just kind of appear on my screen.
We'll definitely do a comms in terms of just telling you how it all works and stuff. I just need the approval, so in order to move forward. Councillor Mills is cited on this one in terms of what's happening. So definitely we'll do that, yeah, promise.
Councillor Mathers?
It's not in regard to the Appendix B, so are we just talking about that, or the item as a whole?
No,
Sorry, just about this for the moment.
Okay,
Appendix B. Okay, all right. Because we'll deal with the bigger part later on in the work programme. But I think yes, definitely. I think that on the basis that it's an additional observation by a temporary committee member, because our colleague was here filling in for somebody else, but it was a sensible, we think, suggestion. It's something that Councillor Mills can have a look at and see. I mean, I can see benefits in ease of identification, let's put it that way. And the other one, of course, that we've all been talking about is I don't mean restriction, but and it's difficult to put in everything that you could possibly think of. But nevertheless, if it's supposed to be easier, then trawling through drop-down lists which don't contain the thing that you want to ask about can be quite challenging. But there's always the box that deals with the description, and I tend to go for that, but that may be just me. All right, well, if there's any other... Oh, one more. Councillor
I have comments on the report, if I may, and the item as a whole, if now's a good time. I think my challenge with this is the context of where we are. And I don't want to move into the conversation around the two groups looking at more user. Councillor Bennett's comment around kind of the user experience has really captured me. I'm not going to say, I won't say excitement. I'm not in that space, but it has genuinely to be user experience focused with any customer service communication. For me, it's not groundbreaking, but it's a change of mindset. And I think the challenge we have here is that there is an education from non-digital to digital solutions. For all of us, a journey. For residents, a journey. And we know that's timely as well, because it helps efficient, effective councils do it in an affordable way. My challenge is that as an elected member, when there's fewer of us overall, when there's less resourcing in our back office staff, and that could be seen as efficiencies or not, it gets extremely challenging and frustrating to help residents resolve their issues with a system that isn't really fit for purpose. And I know we're talking about doing things in a cost-effective way, but when members are spending more time completing service requests on the current portal than the time they've actually spent in their ward looking around, and that's not because they're not spending time in their ward, they are, but then they're spending 4 times the amount of time inputting it. Compared to that customer service experience, the contact centre experience, compared to, and I'm not saying we have to go back to emails, I know that was ineffective in other ways for officers, but it is completely draining and demoralising. And then to have a system where there's no communication between the officers and the councillors. Tickets are closed really quickly. And whereas before we would get holding email saying, we know we're coming up to time, but we need a little longer, the old approach to members' inquiries, whether they were service requests or actual members' inquiries now, would help an elected member resolve an issue with a resident. What happens now is it takes several inputs into the system, several tickets, in order to get the responses back to the residents, to also chase the issue. It takes a particular amount of knowledge to know exactly what service you require, whereas before some of that work was done for councillors. Now, there could be efficiencies and learnings there, I get that, but when I have to submit 5 different tickets around one issue, and it needs some holistic thinking, we've lost that ability to have a solution for one situation, because 5 different teams aren't being coordinated anymore through our ME team like we used to have. And to be fair, they're still there supporting, so I'm not going to undervalue those officers or any officers. But it seems a long way round when what we want to do is see our residents have their concerns resolved, or in cases where they can't be resolved, that there's clear communication, clear expectation, and a clear understanding of what's within the council's scope. And with the current system not doing that, it isn't fit for purpose. And my fear is that we've taken a system that was designed for one purpose and we've tried to migrate it into another purpose, and there's just a huge mismatch. And there's significant frustration from elected members. I definitely hear it from my side. I've heard a few others on the other side feel the same. We're dealing with very complex casework, and that alone takes a lot of time to articulate. And some of the forms have got a little bit easier. That does help. So then, when we're dealing with those matters, we don't want to spend an hour inputting 6 or 7, 8 different locations on the same street, when before we would go, this street is a mess. This street has several... It is helpful to a sense to go, that's exactly where it is, because there were some in the past that were missed. But in the main, we've created a lot of extra work, and it has meant that there is less time, concentration, and less impact, I think, on resolving the residents' issues. Right? It's not as clear now how, when there's a hotspot for fly tipping, how we get those extra steps of signage, letters out to certain offending areas, or how we really resolve the issue at heart rather than just get it removed. And I think yes, the ME system does work in the current system for that, but it operates the same system as a service request, in that you get a period of time and then the issue's shut. Well, we know that hotspots for fly tipping don't get resolved in 10 days. They get resolved over 18 months sometimes. And the residents are persistent with us, equally frustrated with their journey, or just generally the system they have to report those sort of things on. And we're in a situation where it's become highly ineffective to see local change. And I do think it's at the point where it's almost putting the council in disrepute, because the reputation
can I just pause you there for a minute, because I understand what you're saying, but none of that really is a question for Ian as such. That's why I'm saying that if there is room for within the work programme for a review, essentially, of the things that you're talking about, and there are other ways of getting the points you've just made across, not necessarily for Ian, but to the cabinet member, then that could be another way of highlighting issues. So if you've got a range of issues that you've picked up from yourself and from your colleagues, and maybe others as well, then maybe that's a better way of dealing with it, because really none of that is what Ian can answer.
I mean, I don't agree with that, because the question is effectively, does Ian see that with the current system we have, we're going to be able to relieve some of these in a sufficient period of time to help residents get their issues resolved? Through what I've said, there may be something within Ian's thinking and knowledge of the other side of the system where he can see a different approach with officers, where we've seen tweaks in the past when we've spoken about kind of experience of members, where there could be, if there isn't any scope in Ian's mind to change some of these things in a timely manner, then I think we should know that as a committee.
Yeah, it's there's an awful lot of information there, and it's really more, I think, to do with what may come out of a review in terms of the look of the system and how the system works and how it operates. And it's certainly not really something that I would expect and ask Ian to sort of say, yes, it's whatever tonight, because we need to go into more detail, we need to get examples, we need to have understanding of that. So I take your points, I really do, but I think this is not, as we stand, the way to do it tonight. Okay, because we will talk about a review with regard to where we are and how we move on from here. All right, thank you very much.
May I just have it minuted then that the opposition don't feel that we've been able to fully discuss this as we expected in the item this evening.
All right, thank you. Councillor Banerjee.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ian, for quite a comprehensive report. I quite like the numbers, and if I may, just want to ask a couple of questions. Is it possible to identify the breakdown of the MEs from last year to this year. And what I'm getting with this is that are we seeing the same problems like perennially? So what I'm saying is like housing, waste planning, always like going to be in our top three, or are we just like plugging holes? So we know that these are the issues, so go and do initiatives to address these, and then they go down 1 year, and the next year other areas pop up, and then the following year, do you see that it's always like...
It tends to repeat itself. Sorry.
Yeah.
It does tend to repeat itself, but I'm very happy to provide the figures if that would be useful to him. But from my experience, in terms of the servicey type, request type, you'll always have waste up there. You'll always have housing. They're always the questions that continually are high on the list. You'll have education way down the bottom, as in children's services, those type of things. But I'm very happy to provide the data.
And, sorry, in your mic's on. In terms of the SLAs, 80% is good turnaround time. Is there anything in particular that the team are going to do to try and drive that up and, just nudge that percentage point a bit more? And one last quick one, if I may. I had a look through the report towards the end. Is there any plans of the sharing option to go live? So in my ward, probably the same as others around this committee, residents may email 3 councillors saying, can you help with us? And I'd like to see that overarching view, just in case one of my colleagues has submitted the ME before I have, so we don't duplicate the work effort. I know it was something we asked for before. Is there any timeline on when that functionality might go live? Thank you, Chairman.
In terms of the system is still very new in terms of it's been implemented in that respect. But the sharing option, I think it was Councillor Bridges raised that at the last meeting. It's been developed, and it's being developed. Sorry, I should say it's being developed, and it's one that we know that you want as a councillors, because it is a bit frustrating. One councillor might submit it, then another one might submit the same inquiry, and it's a waste of time doing that. So that's something that is important to get done, as is the search functionality. So a councillor who submits many inquiries, to try and identify 1 or 2 within that is really tough to find. But my new director is looking at this as a whole to see what is the best way forward, and I think that feeds into the review that you're planning to do in terms of what the improvements within the system that can be made. That's also one that could be cost effective to the council as a whole. So I think you will see some change in terms of that at some point.
And at the moment, I must say that I do know that some wards, obviously where there's 3 or 2 even, and we only got 1 ward where we've got 1 councillor, but very often I think what happens is that one member will email the other 2 and say, well, I picked this one up, or I've submitted an ME or a service request in regard to this particular thing, especially if it's come after a surgery where you've all been there, and you basically have to divvy up what you're going to do and then just let each other know that you've put it in. If there's also a kind of systemic thing that with the actual system that can tell us, that's fine. But the way potentially round it for the moment is we just let each other know what we've done. And maybe that's the simplest way to do it.
I think that works to a point, but I think what councillors also want to see is the response that comes back. So if they can then see the actual response, it's fine sending it, but actually knowing what's happened, I think that would be quite useful to have. So I think that's an important development that needs to happen.
And that also fed into the request to have named events rather than numbers, I think, because it was quite difficult to track the request by number. All right, that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, unless there's any other... Oh, Councillor Garg.
Sorry, just following on from Councillor Banerjee, on the members' inquiries and service requests, in terms of duplicates, has that analysis already been done? I mean, it should be quite easy to see where there are duplications within a ward. So I wondered how many in the stats, if that analysis has been done.
The answer is it hasn't been done, Councillor, but if it is that's something that you would like to see, I can have a go and see if we can do that. We've got we've got a business partner who would do that, sort of interrogate the system and provide that. So if you'd like that information, I can certainly have a look. Yeah, I think that'll be useful. Yeah. Councillor Banerjee, and then.
Sorry, just to pick up on the SLAs as well.
Yeah. Councillor Bridges.
If I could just go, you mentioned earlier that I mentioned probably a couple of meetings ago actually about the sharing of information with councillors. I just wanted to be a bit more clear on that because I understand fully the implications of sharing resident details in a member's inquiry, especially with GDPR. Completely understand that. But there are two parts to a member's inquiry, and the service requests in particular. I do not see any reason why we shouldn't be able to share that with councillors as a service request. Just reporting an overflowing bin does not require consent from a resident to say that we can be shared with other councillors. Indeed, there are already online platforms such as Fix My Street where I could easily go onto a map and see every resident in my ward who's reported a service request that would fit the same sort of category. So if this is a sticking point with GDPR, can we at least look at that part of the member inquiry process in terms of service requests to make that readily available to our colleagues?
Yeah, you're actually completely right, Councillor, in terms of there will be some that may not even have a name involved in it. There will be some that just requires information, data. So there's no people involved in it. So I completely understand that. The issue isn't the service request v members' inquiry. It's actually the creation of the functionality. That's the issue at the moment in terms of providing that data. I know colleagues in IT have done an awful lot of work to develop that, and I think, to be perfectly frank, I think we should move on this quickly. But in some ways, my hands are tied in that ultimately it'll be a decision made at a more senior level to determine whether that progresses or not. But it's just the functionality within the system.
Well, in that case, I think on that issue, that's the sort of thing that on our behalf, as it were, having come to see us, you can take back both to maybe the borough solicitor and in your sort of officer discussions, and also the cabinet member. I mean, again, another example. I mean, I had something come up the other day where it was being queried the use of there's a generic name for them, but the doorbells that have the cameras on. And there was a case recently, but the difference between that case and the issue, which was about prevention of crime, which is a specific issue in data protection and GDPR. And so I think sometimes we're very risk aware, as it were, but not going into the detail sufficiently to be able to solve it pretty quickly. And very often, lawyers who know about this stuff will say, don't be daft, it's X, don't worry about it. But we tend to spend an awful lot of time dancing around the issue. So maybe to take that back as something to resolve as quick as we can. All right, thank you. Any more? No? All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. And I know you'll be back and seeing us on another occasion, so that's great. Thank you. So, item 8, and this is the referral about consultation arrangements. This was a referral from council, which was based on a motion that was put before council on the last occasion. And just to remind ourselves, the way the motion ended up was that this council regrets a low response rate to its public consultations and asks the Finance and Corporate Services Select Committee to review the council's consultation process to ensure the voice of our diverse communities are heard, working towards geographical parity. I think what we should do is, and again, not tonight because there's too many things to ask, is to have this as a one-meeting review. And I'm thinking to do it on the next occasion in, where are we now, October, November. so that we can then report both to the leader, because I see that as being, in our terms of reference, the leader being one of the cabinet members to whom we report, and then on to full council once we've got a report on it. So if, Marion, you're able to come to the next meeting as well, because what my intention is that, having heard from you on what you've got so far and a bit of discussion on it, is for us to send you our views outside of the committee, and maybe some additional requests and ideas, so that you can come back with a draft report that we can then talk about in some considerable detail, so that we and so that we don't have quite so many items on the agenda next time, and we can really bang this one out. It's an interesting. It was an interesting motion, I think, and well, let's let Marion go first, and then we'll come back to it. You need to press your microphone.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillors, for having me this evening. I lead the customer engagement team. We're made up of 3 officers and 1 vacant position that I've just recently recruited to. So HR is doing the paperwork to get that person on board. And I say thank you for having me, because we're always looking at opportunities to improve our services and deliver to add that added value onto our existing consultation process. So I do welcome the idea of being here this evening. As part of the team itself, customer engagement, is responsible for coordinating consultation, events, engagement activities, estate-based, on and off premises across council teams. And part of those activities include our assemblies, our forums, our conferences, and some that we deliver alongside other partner organizations. In some situations, the consultations that we do carry out are statutory. We have a statutory duty to do so. And on a number of service proposals and changes to ensure inclusivity, fairness, and a focus on certain demographics and cohorts in our local communities. And this always depends on the aim of the consultation. So I was at the Select Committee, Resident Services Select Committee, and on the back of that, we were able to work in partnership with Housemark, who's a specialist provider, to develop a resident engagement strategy. And that strategy has been successfully developed and has been launched. And we have a 3-year delivery plan alongside that strategy to enable us focus in achieving those things that Select Committee had proposed to us, and also addressing some of the issues that have been raised in the motion. So, I provided a report with what we do and a summary, an overview of how we go about it and how we work in partnership with our communications team to deliver engagement within using our finite resources. I welcome any questions you may have at this point.
All right. I think that we need to be quite robust about this in terms of trying to work out what we're trying to do and who we're aiming at and why and for what, because there's lots of variables, it seems to me. When we talk about the council's consultation process, there's lots of different areas of consultation. Some you would expect there to be lots of interest in, depending on what it is, and some, quite frankly, you might not, because it might be very, very geographically controlled, as it were. Not controlled, but aimed at. There's also the issue, and this is what I mean about being bold, about what we're looking at. Are we thinking of communities who are hard to reach? Are we looking at socioeconomic communities that are hard to reach? Are we thinking about ethnicity? Are we thinking about whatever? Simply, the answer is I don't know in that sense. Because the motion was quite wide, I think. It's not like it said, and I'm not saying it should have done, but it's not like it said we've had representations of a particular community who don't seem to get terribly involved or are more concerned about something or whatever. It's more to do with an overall concern that, I suppose my first question is, the extent, and this is something maybe that we look at, well, that we should look at in terms of this single meeting review, is that are the responses low compared to what? Query, what do they call it, benchmarking, and compared to our neighbours and so forth. Neighbours who would be of a similar demographic and a similar resident spread. We also know that, generally speaking, the engagement on the part of the public, residents, for all sorts of things is less than it used to be in years gone by, just as a matter of course in some ways, I guess. Whether that's part of that, I don't know. But there is a very positive side that we observe very frequently. So, for example, the current mayor is often pictured at various events with various communities. And whether or not it would be an idea for us to be encouraged or ask that there be an encouragement on the part of the mayor's office that when the mayor does go to a particular event or a particular community, if the mayor's office know that, I don't know, there's a survey being undertaken or some sort of consultation being undertaken, and he is talking to or visiting a community or a group or whatever. I mean, he goes to all sorts of places, schools and community buildings and hubs and all the rest of it. Whether there's a reach there that we're able to take advantage of. So those are kind of general issues around this whole position that I think it would be good for you to be able to look into. Because I do think we need to understand what we're trying to get at in terms of what result we're trying to look for in this.
I totally agree, Chair. Some of what we do within the team is focused towards tenants and leaseholders, and we have statutory obligations in delivering those. So that's slightly easier to measure because you know exactly your how many properties we're targeting, whether the leaseholders, whether the social housing tenants. So when we go out to engage, we have a benchmarking that we're looking at. You know, even the regulator sets the number of engagement activities. So we have something directly to work with when it's focused on tenants and leaseholders. We are currently running a STAR survey, which is a statutory survey, and that's also focused at tenants and leaseholders, and we've been giving areas of demographics that we need to look at, et cetera, and we would be charged based on our performance against other boroughs. You mentioned about working with other boroughs. I happen to sit on a Pan-London group, which is West London Residents Engagement Group. It's made up of all the my counterparts from other boroughs, and we meet from time to time to talk about how we effective engagement, sharing best practice, just how we can work together sometimes to address financial pressures and things like that. So,
and sorry, just to interrupt there. How do we compare to those people those other authorities that you deal with at that group?
Like in anything, you have some that do better than you and some that you do better than. But I think we are doing fine. We're not in a dire situation per se. And what the recently launched engagement strategy has done for us, I could give you examples here with regards to the survey that we're running at the moment. The regulator has set us a figure of 960 based on our social housing number of social housing properties. which is just under 10% that we should be compliant with. And at the moment we're at 700, halfway through. So we're actually over what they've speculated or our criteria to be met. So it's things like that we look at, and up until March we're aiming to do way over and beyond what we've been expected to do. And the learning from this, I'm at the point of putting together a media review of the survey and satisfaction levels, is to look at where we're at, areas that we've covered, and areas that we haven't received responses for or adequate responses for, so we can target those demographics in the next, or geographical areas in the next cohort, the other part of the latter part of the year. So, like you mentioned, there are barriers to engagement. We are conscious of that, and that's why the council and the team is working towards addressing those issues. We try our best within our expertise to deal, to target the audience that we're dealing with. So, for example, we did a consultation a while ago with people with autism. So, rather than having a text there, we had like pictorial stuff. So it's easy for the children to just point out whether they're happy or they're not happy, yes or no, in parts, things like that. And so we try and focus our expertise based on the type of consultation we're dealing with. And recently we produced a management offer for residents. And at the back, as part of learning and developing, at the back of the pack, we've also included a translation page that has got, these are the main languages that we come across when we go into communities. So we, what this simply says is, if you would like to receive this information in another language, please contact our customer engagement team. We've put the number on there, and we have it in Hindi, Gujarati, Somali, Punjabi, Urdu. These are the main things, languages that we come across. And to add to that, the council has its own provision for interpretation and translation. And at the moment we work with big words. We also use our internal services with our colleagues that speak different languages. We're lucky to have somebody in the team that speak a couple of languages, and that does help when we go out. And this was exhibited when we did the sheltered housing consultation recently. We had this consultation, and all of a sudden we had people who spoke like some of the languages are similar. People that understand Hindu can understand another language. I'm not quite sure which one it was, but somebody in my team could speak both. And we just had those people together at the end of the consultation process, and we went through the consultation again, and they really appreciated that. So we try within our resources to do what we can. We've also offered virtual interpretation, translation for residents, where we had interviews, and we want to ensure that the resident understands what they're signing up for, or what we're talking about. We then can have virtual, we have hybrid meetings. So we're doing a lot. I'm not saying we're doing the best that we can, but we also have to work within the resources that we have to make the most of it. But we always welcome your input. And
some of those things that you've just said,
yeah.
If you turn your mic off for a minute, some of those things that you just said are one side, are one part of the issue, where you've identified maybe a community or a particular sector, and I can understand that's obvious, because if you've got a subject matter and you're going to be aiming at a certain group of people, there will be groups within that group, and it's always the people who shout the loudest, or metaphorically at least, who get heard, obviously. And there may be people within that wider group who don't come forward because they're not used to it, or because they don't think people listen to them, or whatever it is. And part of this is engaging with people. I mean, this is what came out of the minutes of the council meeting in regard to this motion, that it was about encouraging interest, which is difficult because we know that's incredibly difficult. It's difficult in all sorts of different circumstances. But I think for us to get an understanding, and I'd be interested to hear what our colleagues Labour colleagues, as to what sectors of people this was actually aimed at. That would be quite interesting, whether they want to say it now or perhaps in between now and next meeting. But those are, and I kind of envisage a kind of list of, look, we're doing this at the moment, we'd like to do this, and we think that these things, additional things, would help in terms of getting better. But being able to understand where we sit against others, being able to see the hierarchy, if that's the right word, probably isn't, of the type of issues we're dealing with. So do we get a better engagement across the board in regard to certain types of things as opposed to others? I don't know. I mean, you can imagine, I don't know, if somebody said, let's, I don't know, plough up a beloved park and, I don't know, build something on it, well, everyone would go potty and you'd get lots of engagement. Whereas something much less focused or much less exciting might get not very much. And that just may be in the nature of things, I don't know. So I think understanding the scope of this sort of thing would be useful. All right, anybody got any questions? Councillor Bridges.
No question as such, but just really an observation listening to the debate we had at full council and indeed this report. My sort of understanding was that it's not, housing, for example, is very engaged with tenants, and I acknowledge that, and I've seen that in my own committee. They do a very good job, the officers, but the consultations in particular I was concerned with, and I think the Labour opposition may feel the same way, is in regards to those consultations which are more broader and not necessarily up on the agenda. We have things such as the SEND consultation, we've had the library strategy, we also have annually the budget, all of which have very low, I would probably say not good enough response rates. For me, that is a concern, and that's not a particular demographic or ethnicity. I just think there is a broad sense among residents that there's not an appetite to engage in these consultations. Maybe they're hidden too far behind on the council webpage somewhere. Maybe they're not being put forward in the public domain as much as they should be. And for me to get a better understanding of the scoping of this, what I would like to see between now and our next meeting is a list of those previous consultations, say in the last few years, the total number of responses for each one versus the amount of audience it captured at the time, to get a really good understanding of what those success rates really are. I do think there is some areas of our borough where there is a bit of apathy. We can see that in our own results at local elections on the turnouts in some wards, and I believe we may see similar things in our consultations in those same sort of areas. But if that helps, that hopefully gives you some idea of what I would like in terms of a scoping to get an understanding of where this problem lies.
Yeah, Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair, and I do appreciate Councillor Bridges' comments. I think that does give a good sentiment. I think it's always challenging for those who have extremely busy lives, for whatever reason, to engage in processes, and if there are ways in which we're doing them that doesn't help them to engage, then hopefully there'll be some learnings. I think Councillor Core, as well as indicating on the broader ones, and it is, for me, the budget, the SEND strategy, the library strategy, those larger general consultations which should effect some change in decision making, or at least give some broad opinion. It's those that are of the gravest concern, and I think it just, Councillor Core really articulated not just the reach of those into quite a small part of the population, but also the imbalance that those views could provide. So, for example, she spoke about in the library strategies, the 865 were actually, compared to responses, isn't bad, but actually it's still a very low bar. 75% were from the north and from the south, although in the council strategy it was a more kind of balanced thing. So there are definitely ways, but in both of those, the majority of the respondents were white British. And there are other, demographical factors, other, protective characteristics as well.
Interrupt. How do we know that?
No, I'm reading exactly from the data that was taken out of the consultation responses to council.
Oh, okay.
And I think in those ones we have such a diverse borough. And when 48% of the population is white British, for that to be so much higher, I hope is a concern that that we all kind of have, but not a concern that's going to kind of go, it's an impossible way out, but actually start to understand the barriers. And I know the new strategy is there to kind of bring a new lease of life and a bit of different direction, and there's definitely evidence of better engagement in those more specific topic or geographical based consultations. But I would be really interested to understand what reflection is there after consultations. I mean, some of these are also externally commissioned, and I'm not saying that we target any external or internal commissioned things with certain factors, but we would hope we would get the best practice from these externally sourced consultants or consulting, whatever, I don't know what they're called, people that do it for us. And my worry is that when we know there are trends in certain, like the budget comes out every year as a consultation, we know there are certain trends and there are areas that never really respond, what ways they would be innovating from their best practice and from their business model to encourage other voices from within our diverse community. And it would be really useful to find out what the reflection process is, not just on the responses the Cabinet reflect on, but the quantity of responses we got, the voices that were heard, the different approaches that were taken. I'd be really interested to hear how much reflection there is over those. And you said, within our resources. I know there's not an endless magic money tree or whatever the current phrase is, but maybe there is a need for resources to support some of these larger consultations, or larger in terms of impact on the council, but not necessarily in terms of responses. And just a consistent approach to make sure that we're always reaching out to every part of our borough, and every person gets the opportunity to share their voice. So I'd be interested to hear a bit more on how do you reflect on the responses that you got back, not the content, but the quantity and demographics.
Just to pick up on your point in terms of what the report highlighted, that majority of respondents were white over 65. That has always been the case since I joined the council for over 10 years now, 12 years running. Every single time it has always been the case. And it is not a situation isolated to Hillingdon. I work with my counterparts across other boroughs, and it's mainly that. It's like looking at residence groups. There's almost, you can almost tell the people that would run a resident group. And when the core people drop off, the association fizzles out. And that is another thing that is across Pan-London. So, where, in terms of what we can do, people would only engage in areas of interest. When there's an area of interest, like we did the ULEZ consultation, we launched that consultation that day. The next day, I was looking to send a link to someone, and 3,000 people had already responded. I had not even put it through like notice boards or anything like that. So it was just what people's interests are. That's what they will be drawn to, and it's always been that case. But yes, there's always room for improvement. We also welcome working closely with councillors when you do go out into your local communities and you come across those issues, hard to reach groups. We would really welcome your feedback to us, so we can see what we could do to penetrate those geographical areas or those cohorts, etc. With the drive of digital offer, we're seeing a bit more younger people between 25 and 44 filling out surveys. I was really surprised to see the numbers looking at the surveys the other day. So it's all trialing what would work, but the bottom line is based on people's interest. And yes, we have to provide that opportunity. We have to provide the platform. We have to provide the resources and the support, and it's up to the residents to take it.
I think Councillor Mathers makes a good point and really sort of emphasises what we were saying earlier on, that I think it's really important for us to understand the starting position, if you like, where we are. Because what you've just said is absolutely right. I've been going around a number of residents' associations, and it's almost like I mean, they're not the same people, but they are the same type of people who choose to engage in that particular method of communal get-together. And you could pretty much anticipate the sort of folk you're going to get at the next one that you're going to go to, because there is, and it probably has always. And I've been doing this for 10 years, like you have, or actually 13, but never mind. And it's rare to see the younger section of society, and from where people come from and all the rest of it. So you're right about it's always been like that, or that's how it seemed anyway. And I think that's a very interesting observation that ought to be in the report, because it sets the context of where we are at present. But I was taken a bit with some of the issues that came out from the minutes, which talk about encouragement. And I think perhaps one of the ways in which we can help with this, and I think there's a lot of responsibility on us as councillors, so that every engagement that we have, or as many, especially meetings and get-togethers, if it's about a certain issue where you're more likely to get a few people coming along, encouraging them to bring their friends and families along and all the rest of it, and to extend the interest, if you like. Because if they're interested in it, other folk probably are interested in it as well. So to get that additional, because once you get a bit of a roll going, you may get more people. So there's a bit of work for us to do, for certain, I think. But equally, and I go back to this whole business about what the mayor does, and I don't just mean this mayor, but what mayors do by the visits they undertake and the different diverse organisations they get involved with. Excuse me. To see what we can do, because it's pretty much a cross-party wish, to say to the mayor's office, or to talk to the mayor in some form or another, to encourage that engagement.
Chairman, I would just excuse me. I would just add mayor's involvement perhaps in generally encouraging people to participate in democracy and consultations, but I would advise against any specific consultations, because sometimes, as you rightly know, they could be party political in nature.
Yeah, and it's those, as Councillor Mather said, it's those bigger ones, those broader ones, which I can't, for myself, I cannot see any reason why, if the mayor, whether it's this mayor or future mayors, is at a very big event where lots and lots of folk are attending from particular communities, for him to say in his welcome or whatever it is, don't forget, we're coming up to a time when we're going to be asking about the budget, or about this or about that, and we'd love to hear from you. And just making that sort of comment. I can't see anything wrong with it, unless Democrats tell us that we're way off beam, because it is part of the communal engagement, and that may help you in that sense. But again, if you get something that's a really hot topic, you're overwhelmed, aren't you? All right. Well, look, that's where we are. I think if we all submit to Mark our ideas and areas of interest that we can send to you, and you can put together maybe a draft response in time for the next meeting, so we can discuss it, and we'll keep it relatively light so we can talk about it in some detail, and then we can have something we can present to the leader and to council in the future. But thank you very much. It's been really, really, unless there's anybody wanted any particular question raised.
Chairman, just for the committee and some direction, I'll pull together your discussion tonight and the key points, obviously. I got the sense that you were looking at these more universal consultations rather than the ones that you've talked about housing, where you've got perhaps more established methods of consult, and how the council can do more in those more universal consultations to reach out and perhaps get to some of those demographics or different communities. So perhaps if the committee is minded along those lines to bring something back on those more universal consultations, and I'll give you some of the key things that Councillor Bridges and other members have raised in terms of some stats. And I imagine benchmarking is probably quite difficult on those universal consultations, easier perhaps on some of the housing ones, but definitely that information on the past consultations, and perhaps not supplying you with reams of paper, but the headlines in terms of the type of response rates and the people and things like that.
But I still think it would be useful as well, and I know you're not ruling it out, that what Marion was saying about this sort of West London conglomerate of councils. You know, you said that we're not doing that badly. You know, we know some are better, some are worse, which is great. Well, I suppose it's great. But what I mean is to have an understanding, at least, of the extent to which we can compare ourselves to others would also be helpful, I think. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Excellent. Agenda item 9, which is pulling together the conclusions and recommendations for our major review of the last, nearly a year, isn't it? In terms of procurement. So we've put together, I think everybody got this, hopefully, the list of conclusions and recommendations. Okay. And essentially we've got, we split them into different topic heads. And we've got, up to 7.8. And these really reflect very much the areas that we dealt with as far as Matthew was concerned. I actually saw, well, I mean, you did as well, I think, when you went to the contact centre. I actually saw where he sits today, and it's not at all like I imagined. I was expecting him to be sitting in some sort of huge Mekon chair, you know, and have a vast array of people with him, but it's just him in a little sort of cowl place, which is extraordinary. But, I mean, you've all read these conclusions and recommendations. I hope they reflect that which we have been going through and the things that we want to have happen. Pretty much capturing everything that I'd noted from the various meetings that we'd had. And then I suddenly thought, I just got interested in procurement, I don't know why. And then I thought of one last one as well, only today, because it did occur to me that, because one of the pieces of work that we want the Cabinet to adopt, and I hope that these are all recommendations that are the sort which we can expect Cabinet to adopt and act on. That's the main point of these types of committees. We don't want to be giving them stuff that's going to sit on a shelf and never actually get looked at like they have in the way distant past, perhaps. But it did occur to me that one of the things that we were concerned about was, and it may be that such things are very good and are always looked at and it's great, but where you have very long-standing contractual relationships with different companies, that there ought to be a built-in deep dive or deep delve review reported to Cabinet for any contract that had been running consistently for 10 years, I was suggesting. In other words, if we've got a contract that's been running for 10 years, you know, please goodness we can run it for another 10 years, but at least at that point we have a really good look at it and make sure it's fit for purpose and it's doing what it says it is, and we've really well reviewed it. And that goes as a report to Cabinet. And I just thought that might be a good addition to say that any contract, and maybe it ought to be also in terms of money, but any contract, it seems to me, that's running for 10 years or well, certainly running for 10 years, ought to be the subject at a 10-year point of a decent review, so that we do know, if nothing else, so that the department and the Cabinet member know that it's still fit for purpose, because 10 years is a long time and a lot of stuff can change. So if you're happy to build that in.
No, very, very happy. If I may just, I really welcome the kind of the local business stuff. The kind of we asked ourselves a lot, what is local, and how do we encourage that? And I think there was some hints at how the procurement team had tried, and I think with the recommendation, particularly 7.6, it gives that kind of a bit more training and more minds around it with the local. And so I really value that. I wonder if there is an element where we could add something around being conscious not to build in barriers within contracts. So we've spoken a lot about kind of huge, large contracts that mean local businesses naturally aren't able to be part of unless they're kind of subcontracted. And we spoke a little bit about how sometimes our processes and our kind of due diligence requirements can be, you need like 20 people just to get that bid in. And I don't know how to word it. I will lean on your thoughts as well. It's just something where we're conscious that we don't create barriers for local businesses within our procurement contracts. To add to that, you know, we're expanding into the market, but then suddenly if they've got 16 barriers, it's not going to be...
No, I agree. And when I've been trying to bring this together, I mean, this isn't the report, obviously. There's a report to come with it, and it seems to me that's the sort of thing that we expand on during the course of the report, that the awareness issue across lots of different types of subject matter in this. I mean, because I really want this to be a sit-up and take account of type report. So I've gone back to Matthew a few times and sort of said, look, you know, is this going to work? Is that going to work? Is this... You know, we had that additional meeting, which was like his wish list or love list, or sort of love letter to himself, as it were. And I've tried to incorporate some of that in there. But obviously, yeah, I mean, that kind of thinking to be encouraged with the within the report, rather than being a kind of recommendation. Although we do kind of hint at it in the local business engagement section. And so I've tried to sort of cover all the well, as many of the different areas. But the other thing I've tried to be conscious of, and I had it myself when I was in Cabinet, if you have too many recommendations, it's just unwieldy. You know, you either end up saying, I'm going to do all of them, and then, frankly, you don't really, because they're just going to get lost, or they get subsumed. So what you try and do is focus your recommendations on certain issues that do need to be looked at and do need to be processed, which these can, hopefully. All right, other questions? Oh, yeah.
There were just two other areas. One was around the contract management side, which isn't... It will come out in the report, I'm sure. But I'm just conscious that with subcontractors, yes, we want to build them into things, but also, I don't know what the answer is quite, but I felt that we were hinting at the need for kind of more consistency in how subcontractors were contract managed, and how, although that may not sit with procurement directly, how more training and resourcing and shared practice across the council, and particularly in the long-term sort of subcontractors, you know, regular companies that are used by bigger contracts, just how that maintained the quality of service for our residents. And the only other thing I thought was missing, and I know it's already council policy, but was around the kind of the pathway towards transitioning to net zero by 2035. It was mentioned a few times, but I know procurement are in the early days of thinking on that, and I suppose it's for them to start thinking, but not just thinking, but moving forward as the new procurement laws come out and all those sort of things, as how the council can work towards that and how they can build that into, if we're going to be giving contracts for 10 years, for example, if you do that from 2025, it's going to impact on your 2035. So just to be mindful that for longer term contracts, they may not need to build a framework in so that where practicable, I think is the words, that it can be brought into to result in 2035.
Yeah, but yes, but my addition of, if it's 7.9 about the 10-year issue, isn't so much. Rarely would we negotiate a contract of that length straight off. My issue around this, and it is a bit of a bugbear of mine on this on procurement, is that where the contractual relationship has been going on for 10 years as opposed to let's do a 10-year contract. It's really that review process in regard to that particular longevity of contract. I mean, certainly when I was looking at EV charging, for example, there was nobody out there who was willing to do anything less than 15 to 20 years. Well, we're not going to, that isn't going to happen, because for all we know, something else could come along, or things could be dramatically different. It's too long a time for local authorities. So what really that was aimed at was where we've got a situation where it's been 10 years that we've contracted with a particular company or group of companies. We're at that point, right? It's a bit like a service on a car, I'm not saying anyone would leave their car for 10 years to be serviced, Councillor Bridges, but at the same time, it's like a sort of, a commercial MOT after 10 years, just to make sure everything is where it should be, because it's a long time, and it's a long time not to have reviewed it. And yes, if we were to let a contract for 10 years, well, yeah, we'd build in a review aspect to that at some point in any event. All right, good. Mark.
Chair, I just need to flag up on your suggested additional recommendation. The committee could propose as part of this, I would suggest that the thing that would have teeth would be a change to the Constitution, the Procurement Standing Order. So you are proposing other changes to the Constitution, where you build in that review mechanism where that long-standing, if you like, contractual relationship with that same supplier is gone, is about to exceed, just about to exceed 10 years. Then it would come to Cabinet for a review. Now, I think you need to build in a monetary figure, because there are multiple very low-level contracts that might have been continuing for more than 10 years. One example I can think is the one that shows your pictures on the internet. And the committee management system which we use, which is still the market leader, and I'm not sort of advertising them here, but if we were to choose, we've got two products to choose from for that sort of. So that would be captured as part of that. So you might want to consider some kind of monetary value. And I'm thinking around the 100,000 mark, but that's my suggestion. Otherwise, we could be getting lots of things going to Cabinet.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I must confess, I was thinking of the bigger contracts commercially, certainly. Again, all of the monetary limit suggestions we've done are really in brackets, because we've, I think, hopefully, sensibly, what we've said is, look, there should be a monetary limit on this in some form or another, but it's up to the Cabinet Member for Finance and the Leader in Cabinet to set that limit, because in that sense, in conjunction with their senior officers and the senior management team, they've got a much better idea of the number. I mean, this is one of the issues. We don't know how many contracts we've got in this council, and we should. And I mean, we think it's around 2,500 or thereabouts, but it would be useful for this committee and for Councillor Bridges' committee and for the Cabinet members to know at their fingertips how many they've got in their portfolio. So yes, we can put a figure in brackets. I'd probably favour 250 because it just bumps it up a bit. But it does then mean that we get rid of the tiny ones, which just happen to go over. So that's all right. Okay, good. So with those few tweaks, we can put together.
Well, sorry, I'm just conscious of Councillor Mather said. There was one suggestion that Councillor Mather mentioned around reducing barriers to local businesses that apply for contracts. Would the committee be amenable to adding a sentence in on recommendation 7.8? So it would read, and I think this would sort of still keep things consistent. As an element of general commercial concern, the committee were conscious of reducing barriers to local businesses in applying for contracts, and on the important role of subcontractors. ... Something along those lines. Would that be acceptable?
Happy? Okay, agree.
Yep. Okay, I'll have that in.
And therefore, you can build the rest of the report around the recommendations and conclusions. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'll do, the second recommendation on the report delegates us to finalise this, and if we do make any further changes to the recommendations, we'll obviously consult with yourself and the opposition lead. Depending on timing, I think it'd be nice to get this to the November Cabinet's too late now. December Cabinet.
December for certain.
If we can get we'll get it back to the next committee meeting in November. But if not, we'll try and circulate a copy for you to see beforehand of the final report. The important thing is is that delegation provides flexibility just for us to get on and prepare it now.
Well, for the next meeting, if we can get away with it, let's just have this and the consultation as the two topics. Super. All right. Thank you very much. And also, I just want to record my thanks to all of you for having engaged so well with this procurement thing, because it is a big deal, and it's hopefully something that will be a kind of jumping off point for future, the way in which we deal with this in the future, let alone the fact that the Procurement Act bill, whatever it is at the minute, is still something that needs to be embedded. All right. Where are we now? Forward plan, item 10, which we could just note, I think, unless anyone's got any issue they want to raise on that. Nope. Okay, good. Work programme, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. So, you just mentioned next meeting, so we'll bring back that consultation item and procurement review. We've got the usual stuff listed. In terms of the November meeting, I think, we've got an item scheduled, which was scheduled a long time ago, to have an update on all the bid transformation projects that are all going on, so all these reviews that you might be hearing about certain services, so the committee can get an overview of what services are being looked at, basically, and how it's going. That's not the minutiae, but at least you give you that picture. And I think that tied into something nicely Councillor Mather's mentioned at your last meeting around some of where you as a committee might want to review a service area. It's important that you actually know if there are reviews going on at the moment, and what's happening. You don't do that duplication, and you don't have that information at present. So I think that's a useful item.
Where would that come from? Sorry.
Well, I think we would need to speak to the chief exec and transformation lead and get them along to the meeting, or certain people to come and tell you about what the high level picture of all the reviews that are going on. I don't think that will be possible necessarily for the November meeting, but that might be useful in that we can then focus on the review and the consultation item on that. I could move that to maybe the January one, where we could have an update.
We'll tell you what. Why don't we ask the chief exec or his office to send us a paper about the current and immediate proposed reviews.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Happy to do that. It will be subject, I think, to cabinet members being happy with that as well, because there'll be things in there which maybe not be privy for the non-executive side of the council, if you get my drift. But we'll definitely put that request in. So that's might not come forward as a particular item to the November meeting, but you've already got that meeting sorted. Other things mentioned in terms of review areas for your next big review. So discuss the consultation one. I think you want that to be a one meeting, so that's fine. You had James Wright's item on first aid earlier, so I'm assuming, did you want to think about that as a review topic at a later date, or are you quite happy to perhaps bring James back in a year's time or so to see how things are moving on that?
If I may, Chairman, I'm happy for it to come back at a later date. Certainly give us a period to reflect and perhaps look at alternative suggestions when he comes back at a later date. I know I certainly would like to look at the public-facing side of it a bit more in my own time and come back with some potential ideas.
I think it was a well-raised issue, and I think that's a good point. There's a lot. It just struck me there was a lot more that we could look at in terms of that. I mean, we could have talked about health and safety and access and that sort of thing for quite some time, and really the whole kind of configuration of the building in terms of access and accessibility and all the rest of it. So that could be part of a much bigger issue. All right, thank you.
Sorry, Chairman. My thought was for perhaps I to lead on to review topics. The past review delivery, that performance monitoring and reporting review, which came from your predecessor committee, as you're conscious, you're not receiving those quarterly performance updates. So I believe that regime of that quarterly performance is still being put in place. So it might be useful to keep an eye on that, so we don't lose track of you as a committee getting that, and asking officers to come along maybe in a few months' time to give you an update, so I can schedule that on for a future meeting.
Good.
And then I suppose leading into the last thing was the sort of next review topic, and I think a number of areas you have discussed previously. One was around HR recruitment, retention, the working sort of from home aspect, and then this digital journey, if you like, from the user perspective and from residents, and that links in with the councillors' interaction with that through the members' inquiries. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that you want to discuss with the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly on the basis of what we've said earlier, I think that's probably, I mean, like you will know that, well, we've all been keen on and it's kind of interlinked, the whole business about HR and retention, recruitment, working practice, and how that all pans out. And that's all quite important. I believe there has been a review, a sort of officer review as far as all that's concerned as well. And so to the extent that we get to see those, that would be quite interesting to look at that, and then maybe tease out some specific areas, because I know that there are still views and tensions around how work practices are going and what they should look like. And I have to say, you know, my experience today in the contact centre has really completely sort of refocused the way I look at things, because it was just an extraordinary experience, and I know it was for those of you who went earlier in the week. So maybe we can, maybe for the moment we park the HR thing, the whole HR thing, for a slightly more future topic, and really get to grips with this whole digital transformation thing, because I think the kind of the member experience and the resident experience, to really get an understanding about where we are with all of that, and it's timely because there is a conflict in a sense, because it's still quite new. Do you take the view, or do we take the view, that it needs time to embed, and therefore look at all the stuff that you were talking about, Councillor Mathers, or do we say no, as we experience the things that we think are a bar to it being better than it should be, better than it is currently, we meet it head on? What do you think? In other words, I'm asking what the committee think about the HR thing first, or the digital transformation first. Councillor Mathers.
Can I just start by thanking the contact centre staff and echoing your sentiments from your visit today? It was a really insightful experience, and I know that the head of the contact centre is quite happy to host us and others to walk in the shoes, kind of was the phrase that was used. That did show for me the importance of our need to understand digital communication that we're journeying on or are looking at. We all experience it in our kind of day-to-day lives with different companies or government bodies or stuff that we may come across. So for me, I think to increase our understanding and then to add some early expectations that could be considered is probably as helpful, rather than going kind of, you know, deep and heavy on the things that are in and are slightly more embedded. Then yes, there will be more critique, but for those that are brand new, I think it would be helpful. In terms of the HR stuff, I still feel that the head of HR has or whatever it's going to be called in the future, has a really good grasp of what they want to change. I'd love to see how that's been embedded in a year or so's time, and then maybe what there are other things that we can help review and scrutinise. So for me, I think the priority order is more kind of user experience, digitalisation, and then HR.
Thank you. Councillor Banerjee. Oh, did you indicate you may not have? You were very shocked when I called them.
No, sorry, I agree. I think HR can wait and maybe go to digital first, yeah.
Okay, good. Councillor Batt?
Yeah, agree. Yes, I agree. The digital transformation side would be a key one for me personally, particularly around the members' inquiries. there have been plenty of opportunities for us to give suggestions, but I think there are, as has been identified this evening, some fundamental challenges that need to be addressed. And as you said this evening, the contact centre is a very good setup, but for a councillor that is mobile on the go, it is a very challenging system to use. And it's one of the reasons why I feel this should be a priority for us as a committee.
Okay, good. Well, that's a pretty solid concern. Well, Councillor Sesborough, Councillor Gold, you agree, I think. Okay.
Just very quickly, I think the point Councillor made is meant about that this journey is a long journey. We've actually been doing it for many years already, you know, in terms of the move to digital. Like you say, having understanding of where we are now, what are the immediate plans over the next year or two, and just giving councillors that opportunity to say, well, have you thought about doing this, doing that, whatever, making those recommendations to Cabinet, that stock take where we are, and giving that input. I think that would be probably a nice sort of remit for, and that would include the members' inquiries aspect, because that's a key user interface, as your councillors representing your residents, as well as the residents contacting us in the different ways, having that understanding of where we're going, and then adding that councillor stock take, and whether the committee wishes to look at ways of getting that resident view of how they interact, as well as your view on behalf of residents, can all be worked up as part of that review.
Well, no, absolutely. Okay, good. All right, Councillor Moses.
I also had it'd also be very useful to hear from the Director of Digital, whatever the title is, because it would be useful to get a sense of where they feel we are and what their thoughts are. I know they're quite new, but it would be quite nice to be introduced in that way.
Well, what we can do is ask Mark to scope it in terms. I mean, it's a very large topic, and maybe what we should do is to have some sort of steps that can be brought back to us, suggested steps, and also for us to suggest some potential ways of tackling this. You know, what matters to us first, as it were, or what issues, as Councillor Bridges has just said. You know, what issues are we concerned about? And since we've been talking about consultations, there may be some sort of piece of work around who we would like to consult with about this, and how we achieve that. So, okay. So ideas and thoughts, please, to Mark and or myself. Good. All right, that's good on that point. So on that note, I think I can close the meeting. Thank you very much.